Welcome to OtakuDaiKun. Dai here, and for this video, I'll be going over the lore of Fate Extra, Extra CCC, and Extella. With Fate Extella having just come out, there's a lot more depth to this particular spin-off that we can explore. This video could be considered a sequel to my two-part video series on the lore of Fate Stay Night, so if you haven't seen that yet, I highly suggest it. So what exactly is Fate Extra? As mentioned already, it's a spin-off of the popular Fate Stay Night franchise. It started as a game on the PlayStation Portable, and later earned itself a sequel called Fate Extra CCC. Just recently, the third chapter in the series came out in the form of a Muso game called Fate Extella, the Umbral Star, on the PS4 and Vita. The three of them all share their own canon that serves as an alternative reality of sorts to Fate Stay Night. This means that, just like Fate Stay Night, we start with a world of mana and mages who harness that mana for their own purposes. There was once an age of gods, where high-level beings like gods, epic heroes, and other creatures actually existed. But their presence has diminished by the dawn of the modern era, with their legacies turning to myth. The case with Fate Extra, however, is that the Earth is struck by a major incident, causing all mana to disappear from the planet. It is a tale where mankind and the struggle for the Holy Grail occur within a digital environment controlled by an ancient supercomputer called the Moon Cell. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, though. Now, surprisingly, one thing I didn't quite mention even in my Fate Stay Night video is the Throne of Heroes. Sure, during a Holy Grail war, mages summon heroic spirits to serve as their familiars, but the fact that there are heroic spirits at all reveals they had a different purpose. To recap my original lore video, the Earth itself has two different forces at work in order to protect itself, as well as humanity. It is the abstract idea of the collective unconscious taking the form of a will called the deterrent force, more accurately called the counter force. This force steps in during major cataclysmic or warring times to essentially contain threats. One of the ways it does this is by gathering an army of sorts, a collection of epic heroes that it stores and can deploy when necessary. This is the Throne of Heroes, a metaphysical place removed from time, where epic heroes are taken when they die. Heroes who intentionally pledge themselves to the planet are stored as counter-guardians, just like Archer from Stay Night. Regardless of their pact, many heroes simply exist within the Throne of Heroes and are subject to being summoned by mages, or the planet itself, when needed. The first major thing that separates Extra's world from Stay Night's is the existence of the Moon Cell. To keep it relatively simple, the Moon Cell is a powerful supercomputer that was discovered on the Moon in the year 2032. It was built by some advanced species that predates humanity. The Moon Cell has been around longer than the Earth itself, and it primarily observes Earth, constantly scanning the planet and running a simulated version called the Serial Phantasm, otherwise called Seraph. While it's a machine, its complexity appears divine from a human perspective. It contains a record of Earth's history and even calculates alternate realities to an extent. As such, it's very much like Akasha, the Root, and serves the same purpose to Extra as the Root does to Stay Night. Now, instead of mages trying to seek the Root, you'll find them trying to hack the Moon Cell and obtain its great power. The Moon Cell also has its own equivalent to the Throne of Heroes, called the Automaton, where it keeps particular records of Earth's great heroes. There's also a far side of the Moon Cell, which contains malicious data and imaginary numbers meant to be quarantined off from the rest of the data. To put it short, the Moon Cell is a big deal and is at the core of everything in Extra's canon. The second largest element to the Extra canon is called the Umbral Star. Like the Moon Cell, it was created long ago by some unknown advanced race, and is essentially a planet-sized machine of equal complexity and superior power. I like to think of it as the space douchebag, as its function is to search the universe for signs of intelligent life and harvest them as data, which essentially amounts to wiping out entire species. At an early point in human history, the Umbral Star found and targeted Earth, particularly in an attempt to destroy the Moon Cell. To try and infiltrate the Moon Cell, the Umbral Star launched a piece of itself that became lodged within. To defend itself, the cell quarantined off the fragment and began to jam the Umbral Star's detection programming in order to hide. Inside that fragment, however, was a mysterious giant woman named Altera, a being who obeys the Umbral Star as a tool for destruction. Despite being quarantined within the Moon Cell, Altera was able to continue her mission to harvest Earth by creating a giant, glowing white titan on the planet's surface. This titan wrought havoc on the planet's surface during the Age of Gods and fought against actual deities, such as Mars, the god of war. she emerged victorious, stealing Mars' sword for herself. The Moon Cell, in order to save Earth, called forth numerous servants from the automata to fight the Titan. Ultimately, it was Artoria and her powerful Excalibur that took the Titan down. The Umbral Star had left, but was to return again in 14,000 years. And Altera was to remain hidden within the fragment lodged in the Moon Cell until the star returns to finish the job. In the spot where Altera's Titan double was destroyed, humans eventually discovered a child. A little girl made from the remnants of the Titan. Turns out, this little girl wound up being Attila the Hun. Yup, more Nasuverse gender bending. It's become really popular. Anyway, while Attila was a hardened warrior and conqueror, she expressed a dream while riding horseback through her homeland. A dream to leave proof of her existence alive. Now, Attila lived her entire life, never knowing the fact that Altera was the source of her existence. During that time, the dormant Altera hidden within the Moon Cell vicariously experienced Attila's life as a dream of sorts. Because of this, the otherwise cold, calculating destroyer of worlds began to inherit some of Attila's humanity. Anyway, thanks to Artoria, humanity could continue to survive after the Titan attack. That said, history goes quite a bit differently than our own. The Harway family, a mage family, sets up the Harway conglomerate and takes over 60% of the world using its influence and military might. The family discovers that other mages are attempting to hack the Moon Cell in order to seek its power, and declare the Moon Cell to be a threat to their dominion. As a response to all the mages seeking the Moon Cell's power, the Moon Cell simulates the Holy Grail War within itself to determine who is worthy to access it. By the advent of Fate Extra's main story, the Moon Cell has conducted many Grail Wars and has supposedly granted the wishes of its victors. This is pretty unclear though. Regardless, to maintain itself as a world power, the Harway conglomerate sends its heirs Leo and Julius to participate in the next Moon Cell Grail War. Rin Tosaka, in the Fate Extra world, has opposed the Harway conglomerate's rise to power and joins the Grail War in order to defeat Leo. Now, it's time to talk about Fate Extra's antagonist, Twice H. Peaceman. During his life, he became a brilliant neuroscientist, and later helped pioneer Spiritron hacking, the sort of hacking necessary to hack the Moon Cell. Despite being altruistic during his life, he was killed in a terrorist attack. Well, after he died, the Moon Cell began to use his data as an NPC and facilitating the Holy Grail Wars. By interacting with masters, he began to develop his own will and self-awareness. This new consciousness of his felt that the war was essential in allowing humans to continue evolving, and he had the wish of perpetuating warfare. As such, he begins to participate in the wars as a master, having summoned his caster servant, Tamamo no Mae, who we'll get to later. Twice fought in the Grail Wars, but kinda sucked, having lost many times until he winds up losing Caster as his servant. It was then that he got a new servant, a unique one of a special class called Saver, whose true identity is the Buddha Shakyamuni. Together, they won the next Grail War and reached the Moon Cell's core. Ready to get his wish granted, Twice discovers that because he's an NPC, an AI, his data cannot enter the core without being deleted. Thus, he himself cannot get his wish granted. Still determined to fulfill his wish, he camps out outside the Moon Cell core and waits for other masters to win the Grail War. He then asks them to grant his wish for him, and fights them if they refuse. In this way, Twice has defeated a large pile of masters, waiting to be your final boss at the end of the game as a spawn camper. Turns out that you, the protagonist, aren't much different than Twice. On Earth, your character developed a disease called amnesia syndrome, and was put into cryogenic freezing until a cure could be found. Our buddy Twice was on the verge of finding a cure, but alas, was killed as mentioned before. As a result, your protagonist's physical body is nothing more than a TV dinner with freezer burn. Regardless, the Moon Cell used your data to create an NPC, and much like Twice, that NPC took on a consciousness of its own. This artificial protagonist is very much a blank slate and has little connection to its original human body. Either way, you, the protagonist, wind up entering the next Grail War by taking the place of a master who had failed and died in the preliminaries. During Fate Extra, you face off against a whole new batch of masters and servants, some being familiar and others being unique to Extra. As you progress, you wind up befriending either Rin Tosaka or Rani VIII, a special form of homunculus sent to participate in the war. Of course, you wind up winning and advancing to the moon cell's core, where Twice is waiting for you. Like a sensible person, you refuse Twice's request to use your wish to perpetuate war, and wind up fighting him and his servant. You win and enter the moon cell core. Normally, the moon cell would delete your data as invalid because you're an NPC and not a legit master. But the fact that you technically do have a physical body on Earth confuses the moon cell long enough to use the core and make a wish, to discover the truth of your own identity and convey that information to either Rin or Rani before being deleted. Let's take a look at the Grail War's masters and servants. As a protagonist in Fate Extra, you have the option of choosing between either Saber, Caster, or Archer. Saber Extra, as she's sometimes called, is actually Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, the 5th emperor infamously thought to have started the Great Fire of Rome. Nope, the gender bends do not stop. Her mother, Agrippina, arranged for Nero to ascend to the throne as an emperor solely so she could vicariously derive political power from her own daughter, whom she treated like a pawn. Agrippina poisoned Nero throughout her life, holding the antidote as an ultimatum for her obedience. Knowing that, it's no wonder Nero had her own mother executed. There's quite a lot to say about Nero, but it's most important to note that she felt she's failed as a leader despite her passion and eventually committed suicide. That said, she considered herself much more an artist, a work of fine art herself, more than a ruler. She would often hold and participate in extravagant festivals for the arts, and is most proud of her Domus Aurea, a theater she had designed. As many Greeks and Romans were, Nero was bisexual and generally pretty open about the glory of her own body. Of the pantheon of Roman gods, she most respected and idolized Venus, the goddess of love. She falls in love with the protagonist regardless of sex, and is ever trusting. If you pick Caster, you get the pleasure of teaming up with Tamamo no Mae, a fox-like being born from the sun goddess Amaterasu. She's considered an anti-hero, blamed for causing the downfall of great rulers, serving as their loving wife, but ultimately bringing them misfortune. In Extra, the most famous of these rulers is Emperor Toba. When he died of illness, people blamed Tamamo for having assassinated him. As such, she is hunted and eventually killed. Ultimately, Tamamo is genuinely a beautiful and devoted wife to those she cares for, and winds up making you her husband regardless of sex. Choosing Archer will pair you with a heroic spirit with no true name, referred to as Nameless, that bears an identical resemblance to heroic spirit Emiya from Fate Stay Night. Let's cut to the chase. Nameless is pretty much heroic spirit Emiya. Shiro, during the Extra universe, grows up wanting to be a hero of justice all the same, and he lived as a traveling mercenary. While he indeed saved many people, he did so as a vigilante, breaking laws in the process. As such, he was executed rather than defeated. The only difference is that when he appealed to the Moon Cell to become a counter-guardian of sorts, he detached all connection he had with his previous self, hence Nameless. He serves mostly as the embodiment of a hero of justice rather than a specific person. Regardless, I'm sure the details are semantic for Archer fans who are simply glad to see him around. I already mentioned that Rin was a resistance fighter joining the Grail War to defeat Leo, but her servant is Ku Kulon, Ireland's Child of Light. Thankfully, there's nothing different about him from Fate Stay Night. The lore is virtually identical. Rani VIII joined the Grail War because she was created by the Mages Association exclusively to participate and learn more about the Moon Cell's inner workings. Her servant is a Berserker class, Lu Bu, the famous war general from the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. He, in many ways, was seen as a one-man army, capable of taking on various forces as a vagabond warrior. In Extra, being a Berserker, he doesn't really speak as much as he does roar, so he's not nearly as developed as he could be. Fate Extra has its own version of Shinji Mato. This version is a child gaming prodigy and skilled hacker. He's also considered to be far more good-natured than the filthy rapist Shinji of Fate Stay Night. He summons a rider servant, Francis Drake, another gender bend, and a legendary captain who successfully circumnavigated the globe and paved the way for the British Empire's rise to power. Leo, as mentioned before, is the heir to the Harway conglomerate, and fights in the war with a genuine desire to benefit the world by eliminating the Grail, which he perceives as a threat. He's extremely overconfident. as his prestigious upbringing has prevented him from ever experiencing failure. His servant is Sir Gawain, the White Knight of the Round Table. He fought with Excalibur's sister sword, Excalibur Galantine, and derives power from the sun in combat. If we can attribute Artoria's downfall to Lancelot courting Guinevere, then Gawain accidentally assisted in her downfall by refusing to forgive Lancelot, who had once killed his brothers. As such, he blames himself for Artoria's death and serves Leo loyally in order to repent. We've got Dan Blackmore, a veteran soldier who summons none other than Robin Hood as an archer servant. Rather, in Extra, there were a few different people to take on the role of Robin Hood, and this archer was but one of them. Next, there's Alice, who's definitely a weird one. She was originally a fatally wounded child post-World War II and died after being researched. She was a Magus and was able to project her mind into the Mooncell's Seraph system, chilling out like a ghost of sorts. She joins the Grail War alongside a caster servant who is the embodiment of nursery rhymes. Thus, this caster servant is a projection of her master with an identical name and appearance. Leo's half-brother Julius enters the Grail War to ensure Leo's victory. He finds those that pose a threat to Leo and secretly assassinates them before an official battle can begin. On Earth, he served a similar role, assisting Leo from the shadows. He's plagued with guilt for having been assigned to murder Leo's biological mother, Alicia, whom Julius was very fond of. Killing someone so dear to him led Julius to become a cold, empty person. His servant is, logically, an assassin, with the true name Li Shuwen, the Demon Fist Master, a martial artist who mastered the technique of defeating opponents in a single strike. Fun fact, his Bajiquan fighting style also becomes the foundation for Kire Kotomine's fighting in Fate Zero. Ugh. My least favorite character in the Grail War has got to be Runru, a cannibalistic clown lady who, obviously, finds you delicious and worth eating. Her servant is a lancer, Vlad III, also known as Dracula. He's a Wallachian prince of Romanian fame, who is known for his cruelty. His name would go down in history to represent the famous blood-sucking monster we're all familiar with. Vlad's a crazy one, as he declares Runru to be his wife, and he finds her insanity to be her most beautiful trait. The last master-servant pair in this particular Grail War is Monji Gato, a man dedicated to his self-made religion. He worships his servant as a god, and is an incompetent mage. His servant, however, who is summoned as an inferior berserker, is none other than Arcueid Brunestud. Now, due to Tsukihime's lore dealing with the moon, and the existence of the Mooncell contradicting that lore, it's easy to think of Arcueid as a mere fan service character. She is what is considered to be a true ancestor, a form of vampiric being with immense power. Whatever lore I could give on her, pertaining to Extra, would be semantics to justify her inclusion. To that end, it's best to leave her as a bit of a mystery. At this point, we run into a bit of an issue, due to Fate Extra CCC never getting an English release. Axis, I cannot respect you as a company for abandoning this game and leaving many people holding their breath in vain. As such, CCC is very complex and not very well documented, but I'll do my best to try and bridge that gap. CCC has been described as the Heaven's Feel route of Fate Extra. It all stems from Sakura Mato, who in the Extra universe is no more than an AI created by the Mooncell. Regardless, she apparently develops feelings for the protagonist, and those feelings escape in the form of an AI called BB. BB uses the power of the Mooncell to send the protagonist and other characters to the far side of the Mooncell, where they must escape and return to the main Holy Grail War. This is because, by the end of the day on the near side, Sakura's unstable programming would ultimately be terminated by the Mooncell. By sending the protag to the far side, she would essentially hold on to her love for a while longer, since time passes differently on the far side. To escape, you must venture through the Sakura labyrinth that she created, and defeat various masters that BB had put under her control. Fate Extra CCC has several endings, none of which really tie into the third work in the trilogy, Fate Extella. However, it is noteworthy for introducing us to some new servants, namely Karna and Elizabeth Bathory. It also allows you to choose Gilgamesh as your servant because due to his immense strength, he has been exiled to the far side of the Mooncell, and you can find him there. I'll dive more into their roles further on. So, other than some recurring servants, Fate Extra CCC really doesn't have much impact when looking at Extra and Extella. In fact, the base plot for Extella isn't even a direct continuation of the original PSP game. Rather, it's easiest to think of it as an alternate ending. It goes off of the assumption that you chose Nero as your partner in the Grail War, and during your final confrontation, you received help from Tamamo as a secondary servant. Nevertheless, rather than having to go into the Moon Cell core and get deleted, the Moon Cell recognizes you and Nero as victors of the war, and are granted access to the Moon Cell's powers via a special ring, the Regalia. As it turns out, this is actually the Moon Cell's way of preparing its defense against the Umbral Star I mentioned earlier, which is approaching its 14,000-year reunion. Before diving into Fate Extella, I want to go over a more general Nasuverse concept, time travel, and the quantum time lock, because it applies to Fate Extella and apparently Grand Order as well, which might be in a later video. To be honest, the concept is overly convoluted and filled with technobabble. Too much for its own good, so I'll polish the idea when explaining. I mentioned that the Earth itself has its own force of consciousness, but did you know the universe as a whole does also? Yep, there's this force called the Great Tree known as time, which constantly calculates possible realities, or different ways events in time can occur, resulting in unlimited branching timelines. This could literally involve the universe having to keep track of an infinite number of realities, but that's simply not possible. In the Nasuverse, the universe has a lifespan that would be strained by all those calculations. To fix this problem, the universe implements a quantum time lock, which chops the most diverging realities so that only a smaller number of possibilities can occur. If you picture the different timelines as tree branches, the quantum time lock is like the chopping of branches that stray too far from the root of the tree. In that sense, it's a lot like an attractor field from Steins Gate. Suddenly, the universe decides that this event right here can never be changed. As a result, changing anything that happens in the past or future will have no effect on what occurs in that present moment. If there were a time lock right when you got an F on an important test in school, then going backwards or forwards in time would do no good. Even if you went back in time and studied for the entire year prior, you would still get an F. However, if you had traveled back in time prior to the time lock being placed, you could still change reality. But once it's there, that moment's inevitable. Long story short, to cut down on the number of possible realities the universe has to keep track of, it occasionally solidifies certain moments so they can never be changed. At this point, we'll shift our focus to Extella's main antagonist, Archimedes. Yeah, the mathematician becomes a villain mainly because he values progress and power over humanity. It's uncertain how he learned of the Umbral Star, but during his time acting as an engineer for the Moon Cell, he learned of the star and secretly planned to assist with its destruction of Earth. He figured that, by destroying the Regalia, he would cripple the Moon Cell and deactivate its jamming signal, allowing the Umbral Star to once again pinpoint the Earth's location. Archimedes confronts you, the protagonist, explaining that the Moon Cell had a quarantined section called the Zero Dark, where the great Titan from ancient times still resides in rest. He pleads you to join him, to destroy the Titan using the power of the Regalia. You agree, and together you reach the Zero Dark and find a cave where Altera is sleeping. Archimedes orders you to destroy her, but you hesitate, and Altera wakes up. She grabs you, and Archimedes boasts that this was all his plan all along, that Altera would crush both you and the Regalia. On the verge of death, you come up with a solution to prevent the Regalia's destruction. You use its power to split it into 3 pieces, 2 of which scatter across Seraph. Sadly, your cyberframe also gets split into its 3 digital components, the body, soul, and mind. The soul and mind fly off, but the body remains in Altera's hand. Upset with Archimedes using her, Altera chases him away and decides to hold you hostage. She plans on holding you prisoner as she ventures into Seraph to reclaim the missing pieces of the Regalia. To fulfill her original mission, she would destroy the Regalia, call the Umbral Star, gain its power, and descend upon the Earth once more as the White Titan. Turns out, splitting from your mind and soul leave your body lacking in memories. You're pretty much a blank slate, forced to do what Altera asks of you. While her Titan body can't leave the cave, she's able to send out a smaller cyberframe in the form of Attila, whose personality differs, but has the same goal. She goes out and amasses her army of Iskander, Gilgamesh, and Jeanne d'Arc of all people. Iskander is, of course, Alexander the Great, King of Conquerors. Get more details on him during my original Fate lore video. In Extella, he joins Altera because he was defeated by her in battle. Gilgamesh joins out of interest for the protagonist's fate, but also to pay back a debt his father had incurred to Attila. He's the king of heroes, the demigod ruler of Mesopotamia. Like Iskander, I also speak about him in my previous video. Jeanne d'Arc, however, is a newer inclusion to the Fate universe. She's part of Apocrypha, and she's more or less the same here. In life, she fought for the French due to divine visions she had received from God. She was considered a hero to the French, but was captured by English allies and put to death, later to go down in history as a martyr. In Fate Apocrypha, which is an alternate timeline to Fate Stay Night, Jeanne is summoned into a special ruler class, tasked with acting out the Grail's will in the interest of preserving the war. In Extella, she's similar, having been summoned as a ruler class servant by the Moon Cell in order to protect it. She winds up defecting to Altera's side in order to better understand her and possibly change her for the best. Fun fact, in Apocrypha, she's summoned as a heroic spirit, but actually possesses the body of a French girl. This idea of servants possessing human bodies winds up happening more often in the Fate spin-off titles. So the protagonist split in three, yeah? Well, one piece, the mind, found its way to Nero, bringing her a piece of the regalia. The soul found its way to Tamamo, giving her the same power. Just like the body, these split pieces have amnesia and do not recall that Archimedes revealed himself to be a villain. As a result, Nero, Tamamo, and later Altera all wind up battling each other in various territory battles in order to unite the regalia for their own ends. This is Archimedes' backup plan, to have the armies fight each other and reunite the regalia so he can sneak in and destroy it. So let's look at Nero's army, which is made up entirely from servants in the Moon Cell's Grail War. Nameless, Ku Kulon, Li Shuwen, and Gawain. They've already been mentioned, so I'll move to Tamamo's army. There's Lu Bu from the Moon Cell Grail War, as well as Medusa, who I mentioned in my second Fate lore video. Her other two servants debuted in CCC, but it's easier to talk about them now. First, there's Karna, the son of the sun god, from the Hindu epic poem, the Mahabharata. In life, he was an exceptional warrior and fearsome bowman. He became a bitter rival of Arjuna, the Mahabharata's protagonist and central hero. Karna is known by history to be both charitable and deadly. He's technically a Lancer-class servant, but his former master from CCC, Jinako, declared him to be a launcher after witnessing his powerful noble phantasm, Brahmastra. Then there's Elizabeth Bathory, a Hungarian noble who went down in history as a horrific serial killer. Infatuated with beauty, she discovered her skin felt smoother when covered in blood, and to remain youthful, she would then torture and murder hundreds of young women at her estate, disguised as a school of etiquette for ladies. She'd wring their blood and bathe in it as a means of preserving her beauty. In servant form, she appears dragon-like, in line with her family lineage as the House of Dracula. The Elizabeth we see in the game is actually her before she became a bloody killer. This younger self is actually trying to avoid becoming a killer, but is certainly unstable to say the least. Sensing her inner darkness, Archimedes corrupts her into a servant of Velber, the Umbral Star, and to his own demise, counts on her to fulfill his ambitions. Fate Extella has 4 different story paths, one for Nero, Tamamo, and Altera, with a final true ending route. In the first 3 routes, each servant is accompanied by 1/3 of the regalia and one part of the protagonist's cyberframe. Archimedes explains that having one's soul, mind, and body separated is very unstable, and at least 2 pieces need to be united to ensure you won't fade away altogether. It's a bit semantic, but each of the servants, not just to complete the regalia, also fights to unite the protagonist. The first route is Nero's. You and Nero share a loving bond and set out to conquer all the territories being generated by Seraph. You defeat Tamamo, but Elizabeth jumps in and fucks everything up. She snatches Tamamo's regalia and tries it on herself, but it gets destroyed in the process. Lacking knowledge of Archimedes' true intentions, you and Nero work with him to eventually conquer Altera's domain and defeat her incarnation as Sephar the Titan. Ultimately, though, you're unable to fully unite yourself or the regalia. Apparently, this sucks for both you and Archimedes, as he needs the regalia to be completed again before he can destroy it. The little shit decides to go back in time and try again, leaving you and Nero alone as you lose consciousness and await your end. Archimedes returns to the moment just after you split yourself in the regalia, as that moment in time had been part of a quantum time lock and cannot be changed. This time, he approaches Tamamo, who's enjoying her time with the protagonist's soul as your wife. To restore you and the regalia, she too tries to conquer all of Seraph. In a similar way, however, neither you nor the regalia get united, and once again, Archimedes travels back in time to start over. Nero and Tamamo's arcs end on a bittersweet note, neither one thwarting the threat of the Umbral Star for good. The third route is Altera's, and follows you as the protagonist's body, being imprisoned by the beautiful Titan. By spending time with Altera, both as a giant and a cyberframe of Attila, you begin to learn that she doesn't actually want to be the bringer of destruction the Umbral Star created her to be. As such, you begin to form an intimate bond with her, and help her defeat Nero and Tamamo to restore the regalia. This time round, you're able to restore the regalia, but your soul and mind wind up being defeated, along with their servants. At the end of this arc, you wind up saying farewell to Altera, who is sad, but ultimately happy to see you through to the end. She winds up valuing her partnership with you far more than the orders from the Umbral Star. You too treasure your bond and want to do something to save her. Archimedes deems this another failure and goes back in time to try again, leaving you alone, on the verge of vanishing yourself. However, this time you have a complete regalia and decide to try and use it to save Altera. You discover that you're too frail to travel back in time yourself, so you instead place all your bets on sending your memories back in time. This is the key to reaching Extella's true end. On the final route, you begin again as the protagonist's mind paired with Nero. While extremely vague and unclear, you do wind up retaining some faint memories from a different timeline. Memories of a different you and Altera being together. When Archimedes shows up, you manage to recognize him as an enemy way ahead of time, and begin fighting in Seraph, not to defeat Tamamo or Altera, but to join them instead. You fight your way to Tamamo and convince her to join you. This more amicable approach lets you unite your soul and mind, and join two pieces of the regalia. In a similar way, you also wind up convincing Altera to help out, by getting her to realize her own desire to be with her master, and not to be a pawn of Velber. She hands over the regalia and her powerful Sword of Mars before vanishing, due to not having a master anymore. So finally, you and Nero manage to unite the mind, soul, and body, as well as the entire regalia. Archimedes seals the Titan body of Altera away, and comes to attack, but you defeat him too. In a fit of rage, Archimedes summons down the awesome power of the Velber Shard that wedged itself into the moon cell 14,000 years ago. He plans to use it to collide with the moon cell core and destroy it that way. Just as the shard is about to impact the core, the Titan Altera jumps forth and punches it, killing its momentum. This impact is too much for her and she vanishes, having sacrificed herself to save the moon cell. Turns out that Elizabeth was hoping to consume Altera's blood, and she intentionally unsealed the restraints Archimedes put on Altera. By entrusting power to this crazy girl, Archimedes brought about his own demise. Still not giving up, he uses the fallen Velber Shard to accelerate the entire Seraph landmass into colliding with the moon cell core. While you and Nero lack the power to stop the shard on your own, you do have one final card to play. Nero uses the Sword of Mars to communicate with the Roman gods and summon into herself the goddess of love, Venus. This godlike Nero has enough power to breach the shard's armor and destroy it from the inside, ending Archimedes' reign of power. In the aftermath of Venus's final attack, Altera's lingering presence gets reborn as a child, and you, Nero, Tamamo, and Lil Altera share a happy ending together. Or do they? Extella ends with both Archimedes and Elizabeth still alive. Archimedes, in particular, continues to wait for another chance at eliminating the moon cell as a servant of the Umbral Star. Could this be sequel material? Either way, that covers every entry in the Fate Extra series so far. Given that Nero is just so cute and honest about her affections, I honestly wouldn't mind seeing this series continue. But for now, I've said my piece. If you enjoyed this video, then please like, comment, and subscribe to OtakuDaiKun for more anime lists, reviews, analyses, discussions, recommendations, and Let's Plays. Until the next video, celebrate your fandom.